Hi there, BookTube. Now, as I was lying in bed drinking tea this morning, it being Sunday morning, and reading the Sunday paper, I happened upon an article called The Shortlist. Here we go. 30 of the best concise films and books. It's really an article sort of celebrating that, short can be beautiful and things don't need to be long to be of artistic worth, shall we say. And it in the article, they got people to pick 15 films and 15 books that are like good things in small packages, that are short but perfectly formed. And I'm not going to talk about the films because, if you want to know about those, you've got to look it up online. I'll try and give a link if I can. But I realised that of the 15 books they mentioned, 6 are ones that I've read and really all ones that I really enjoy and admire. Another 3 are already on my sort of long-term TBR, and by the time I'd read about the other 6, I thought I want to read all of those as well. And it got me thinking about how much I enjoy books that pack a novel's worth of ideas and style and interest into less than 200 pages. How I really value those kind of like little gems. And this might be heresy to say in, March of the Mammoths month, but I wanted to do a little video about why I appreciate shorter works and talk about a few favourites and some of the ones they talked about in this article, and invite you to share your favourite book under 200 pages that packs a punch in that length of time. First thing I must say is it's not that I don't only like shorter fiction. In fact, some of my all-time favourite books are big fat chunksters. Middlemarch springs to mind, and Bleak House and War and Peace, and not only classics, more recently, something like Fine Balance, for example, and there is a pleasure in losing yourself in a long book. But I'm always wary that a longer book may not deliver pleasure in proportion to its length. In the article, there's a quote from E.M. Forster, and I'm reading E.M. Forster at the moment, so I was interested to see his view on this, and I loved what he says. Okay, he says, one always tends to overpraise a long book because one's got through it. And I thought to myself, well, do I overvalue, I don't know, Magic Mountain or Don Quixote or Tristram Shandy, all 3 books that I read last year and were all sort of amongst my books of the year, just because of having managed to survive, to get through the whole thing. I don't think so. But I've certainly read books, and increasingly, I think, read books these days where I think, that would have been a better book if it had just been a bit shorter. Just slightly better edited. Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. That was a book that I thought, if that had been, 2/3 of its length, I probably would have praised it to high heaven. And instead, I was like just slightly reserved about it. Stoneblind, Medusa's Story by Natalie Haynes, just on the Women's Prize for Fiction long list. Really lovely book, but I just thought a good editor would have trimmed out some of the repetition in that book, and it would have been better for it. So, and there's always a risk with a longer book, I suppose, that you get perhaps chunks that are a bit self-indulgent or a bit repetitive, or that just drag a bit, that are a bit duller or weaker than other parts. But by the time you get to the end of the book, you may have kind of forgotten those in the whole, whereas a short book has to nail it on every page. In fact, preferably, every word, and perfect example of a book that does that. It was one of the 15 that they picked in this article, which is L.L. Carr's A Month in the Country. It's about, I don't know, 110 pages or something, and there is not a sentence in there that is out of place or unnecessary. And it just because it's that short doesn't mean that it isn't like rich in interest and character. There are books that are kind of famously short, I suppose, and other ones they picked was Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan, which is famously the shortest book ever to have been shortlisted for the Booker Prize. But the character development in that little book is really complex and interesting. Not just the main character, but other characters, like say the Mother Superior, in the convent. She's conjured up in just a few lines, but but as a whole person, with moral ambiguities that go beyond you might work hard to create in a longer book. I am thinking of books full of complex ideas. Another one in that was picked out of the 15 in this article was another of my books of the year last year, and that was A Minor Detail by Adania Shibli. And that book, I actually didn't remember it as a short book. It has so much history in it, so much thought about the sort of Palestine-Israeli sort of conflict and history, that it doesn't sort of skip the complexities just because it's a short book. It just like hones in and gets to the point. Some short books it's something about the economy of style, I suppose. And another of the ones in the article was Hotel du Lac by Anita Bruckner. And there's just something so, elegant in its brevity. That, again, you would not necessarily think, that was over fast, that was short, because of the sort of delicacy of detail and almost sort of sensual description, as well as the emotional atmosphere of the book. And as I say, some of the ones in their list of short books I completely had not thought of as being short at all. This one, Jean Rhys, Why Sargasso Sea. I would, if you had asked me how long was that book, I'd have guessed, I don't know what I'd have guessed. I certainly wouldn't have thought 156 pages, because I remember it with such, being so engaged and enveloped in a whole world and a story. And, perhaps the fact that it kind of is crossing over with Jane Eyre adds something to it. But that isn't always the case with a shorter book. Mrs. Dalloway, Virginia Woolf. Now, one of the most sort of complexly interesting and stylistically fascinating books in English literature. I would never have remembered that it was only about 170 pages, but it is. If you've read Hearth of Darkness, you don't think of that as being something that's only, about 120 pages long, do you? Because you're taken into sort of a whole nightmarish world in the mind of the protagonist and the experiences of the protagonist. The Outsider, again, you kind of know it's short, but you don't specifically think, only about 120 pages, do you? Because the emotional and intellectual journey in those books is the equal of other books of 400 or 500 pages. I And this is in this article, it mentions something that Toni Morrison said. Well, it doesn't actually quote it, but I went and looked up the quote. And what she said was, it's what you don't write that frequently gives what you do write its power. And I think that is some of the magic of a short book. You know, if every sentence is honed and every word earns its place, and there's no sort of stylistic indulgences, and then one of the things that you have to do is trust the reader to read between the lines, and I think with these books that I've thought of as being longer than they really are, it's because I, the reader, have kind of extended beyond it in my head. But that was the writer's achievement, you know, not mine. They created the space between the lines for me to enter that world, that bigger, that, you know, more substantial world of the imagination, I suppose. And sometimes there's things you can do in a short book which you could not possibly sustain in a longer one. And I just read this week a book for Deweython, the Welsh read along. It's called Cove by Cynan Jones, and it was recommended by Kiran of KD Books, because I sort of said, well, I was looking for something that would match up to my last year's Deweython read, which was One Moonlit Night by Carol Pritchard, 176 pages, that one. And I kind of joked to him, having bought it, that it had better deliver, because, it probably, cost about 10 pence per page of writing. So, we're going to get 10 pence worth of pleasure out of it, or interest out of every page. Well, absolutely, because it's like a prose poem, that book, and that's something that you can do in a book of 70 pages that, in a book of 700 pages would be infuriating. So many reasons why short books are a delight and a pleasure to me. I'm going to mention 5 short books that for me deliver a reading experience for the reader that goes sort of far beyond what the length of the book might suggest. And I would love to hear your equivalent 5 in the notes, or make a video if you're someone who makes videos. So here's my 5 that I would add to the ones in the list in this article. 1, Kate Chopin, The Awakening, 1899, American. Was a shocker when it came out, because it talks frankly about married woman having an affair. The psychological depth of this book goes far beyond 115, 120 pages. Thornton Wilder, The Bridge of St. Louis Rey, American book from the 1920s. Very short, again, about 120 pages. It's about a bridge that collapses in Lima in the late 17th or early 18th century, and how a monk, a religious person, sort of follows or looks into the lives of the 5 people that died when that bridge collapsed, to see if there was some meaning or reason to that. And it really exposes, I suppose, colonial thinking, a bit like Heart of Darkness, in fact. Gorgeous short book, Jamelia by Chingiz Aimatov. Book about love and friendship and living on a collective farm and post-traumatic stress and injury. All that in 96 pages of well-spaced lines. The Summer Book, Tove Jansson. Such a simple story, but with such depth about a grandmother and her granddaughter spending the summer together on an island. And it's a book where nothing happens, but you're never for a moment bored through its 160 pages of intense beauty, but calmness and simplicity. And finally, a more up-to-date one, The Vegetarian by Han Kang. I mean, I could have picked so many books, and this is a sort of a random 5, but the sort of shift of perspective and the I don't know, adventurousness of the ideas in this book in a short space, in just about 180 pages, is what makes it special and a delight. So that's mine. Tell me about yours.